I will call the meeting to order. I don't think I have anything to add to the agenda, but you will notice that the last item is to discuss future meetings, plural. So that's a slight change that we made. So our first item is comments from the public on items not on the agenda. Anyone have a comment? Erin? Yeah. Sure. Wherever you're, yeah, up here would be good. Yeah, so the camera can get you.
Oh, sure.
So, do you want a microphone?
So my name is Jackie Hooker. I'm a resident of Essex Westford. My son is a 4th grade student at Fleming, and I have a daughter at Hiawatha in 3rd grade.
Yeah, hi everybody. And so my son is also at Fleming and he's in 5th grade. So we're both members of the parent-teacher organization at Fleming.
Okay.
And we had been talking to Dan Ryan just briefly at a PTO meeting about Mr. Oquendo, who's a music teacher, his position there. He's a 0.9 FTE. And we were hoping to advocate, and then we're doing some work on the budget, to advocate for him to be a 1.0 FTE, so adding 0.1 to his position. And I think, as we understand it, if that's added, that students would be able to have chorus during their school day. And I think it hasn't been offered, from what I understand, at Fleming for about 10 years. And Mr. Quindo has taken it upon himself to volunteer. So he's asked students he kind of put out a note to teachers and asked if anyone would like to come and volunteer to come and perform at the Fine Arts Night in March. And he had 106 students volunteer, which I think is awesome. And I think a lot of those students were boys, which is really awesome. And I feel like, and he has expressed that, if students join the chorus when they're younger, they're more apt to join chorus as they get older, and more apt to stay with it through middle school and potentially high school. So I think that's a wonderful opportunity.
Yep. And I think also, I know that there were extensive conversations when the consolidation was in process and about equity. So I think we would urge the board to maybe look at what the music staffing is like at Founders. So we're trying to look for some equity there. I think we're definitely here as representatives, for a lot of the parents at Fleming that would love to see us, just bring that up to a full FTE. I know that there's also obviously considerations that you're looking at, things like what the enrollment's going to be looking like for next year, which will also play a role, I know. And I think this is also obviously an opportunity for us. We wanted to make sure to thank the board because I know historically the board and the district and the public have always been so supportive of making sure that the arts are a strong and consistent part of the curriculum. And so we do feel like the fact that, ADL has chorus, this is a great opportunity for a lot of the kids to be able to start chorus. We know that when kids start chorus, obviously as well as musical instrument instruction at a younger age, they're much more likely to carry that forward. And so, I think timing does have an element as far as where it's placed in the curriculum. So, I think that was kind of what we wanted to say. So
there were some other considerations. There's potential for maybe EJRP, Parks and Rec Department, to have a chorus at the school, maybe offer it. But I think in terms of equity and access for children who may not be able to afford something like that, it would be great to have that during their school day. So. Well, thank you for considering.
yeah, thanks for listening to us. We really appreciate it.
Just 1 second. Let me do this.
You don't want me to drop this.
Do any board members have clarifying questions? Keely.
My question is, I believe this music teacher was one who was hired last year to replace a previous music teacher who had also been 0.9. Is that correct?
That's actually an excellent point that you're bringing up. I don't know if Mr. Costanza was a 0.9. I do think, honestly, a consideration to be made, though, was that Mr. Costanza was a senior teacher that did did retire. And so I think that maybe in reviewing the budget, there could be a little bit of room there. Also, I know that certainly a retirement at one school is not gonna be something that can be considered specifically for that school.
Right.
It's something for the district. But I do think that maybe when looking at this, you know, you can, you know, use the lens to kind of look at that as maybe part of the picture.
I guess
So that I
my
would
question
not
was
know.
actually, should we as a board take this that like people are really enthusiastic and having a good time with the new hire?
Oh,
Okay.
absolutely.
Because it's nice to hear
I-
feedback
I
from
think- I
the
think-
decisions that were made
one
last
could
year.
definitely say that, yeah. I think very engaging with the students, using some new technology. We've been hearing a lot about that, so it's pretty exciting. Yeah.
And I think he has over 50 students that are taking instruments, and he's instructing those students as well throughout the week, so.
And he was very quickly, I mean, it was like able to get over 100 kids to jump into chorus, which I thought was pretty amazing. So,
Great. Any other clarifying questions? Okay. As
Okay.
you know, we'll take it under consideration.
thank
but
you.
Thank you very much for bringing this forward for us to consider.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks.
Good night.
Kim, did you get the names? Kim,
I have them.
Marla.
Can't get those names.
looking over there.
Yes, I have,
Sorry.
I have the names.
Okay, perfect.
Kim, go sit there.
All right. Dylan, you're just here. Yeah, okay. Well,
Just
welcome.
hanging out.
All right. Next item is the consent, well, there's no point doing it as a consent agenda, really. I'll entertain a motion that we approve the minutes from the February 6th meeting.
I really think you should pull them until the next meeting. None of us got them.
Oh,
They were never sent out.
okay, we'll pull it. Okay. I think that's,
I looked
Oh,
at
I was
six.
like, wait, I read. I wasn't at the meeting, but I read the minutes.
I looked at 6 o'clock and
Yeah, I
it
know.
was.
Okay, so pull up.
Or not as a group.
Okay, so
Some.
I think that may be
I read them
better
down.
anyway. I prefer to do minutes at regular meetings, not at the budget workshops. So we'll have the minutes from the 6th, the 8th, and the 13th at our meeting next week. So, okay. So those are pulled. Let's move on to the budget work session. Brian, take it away.
Excellent. I had planned on that consent agenda taking a few hours, so I only have a few minutes worth of presentation, so. Just. So, as I've done in the past, Martha, there's, the slide deck that's being handed out, for your review actually has some slides we won't review tonight. You're looking at sort of the entire deck that is the beginning of what will go online starting tomorrow. I did want to just let folks know that as these have been going online, we've been keeping some analytics and we've been seeing some good traffic to the slides, over 100 people viewing the slides at this point in time. And we've been adding materials on a daily basis that build some depth to understanding of the educational funding formula, our capital plan, doing some pullouts. Ben's been pushing it on our webpage, on some social media as well, so it's working out pretty well. So what we're going to do tonight is one of our first looks is at the Center for Technology. And we'll also take a look at the administrative and other supports that are part of the budget, the 3 elements. But let's start with getting to see some of the numbers of EWSD. So this evening, sharing with you some numbers coming from our child nutrition program. So we're on track to serve about 80,000 pounds of fresh fruits and vegetables this school year, which is a nice number. It's really taking off. Salad bars have been added to schools that didn't previously have them. and it's been really working out well throughout the time. It's also a place where we can do a lot of exposure to farm to table kind of work, some things, fresh products coming from Vermont that can scale to that size. Each day, our child nutrition program records over 4,000 transactions. 24% of our student population participate in the free and reduced program. And this school year, EWSD will serve over 500,000 meals. So again, we've talked sometimes in scope and size. You know, this is, you know, when you start looking at 500,000 meals being served, we're nowhere near like restaurant size or scale. We're nowhere near even large, even convention centers. This is really gets up into institutional feeding. And 500,000 meals, if you add in the summer meals that we do, and also Little Ones University, we're up towards over 600,000 meals in the course of a year.
Brian, do you know what that percentage was last year of the free and reduced?
Yeah, I actually know that it was about 22% back in October when Amy came to talk to you some about our demographics.
Yeah.
So we've seen an uptick of about 2% since the beginning of our school year. If you looked at about a year ago, you'd probably see another 2% decline. If you look at 10 years, you'd be down into the low teens. I think the numbers when I was previously an administrator were more in the range of 13, 14%, with some schools as low as 9% for free and reduced. So we are definitely seeing a changing demographic across our area. It's also still an incredibly laborious, tedious, paperwork-filled, obstacle-presenting process to become eligible. Really difficult for people that struggle with English as their first language or have literacy issues. So, you know, that becomes a barrier that we've talked to the state about.
You may not know, but that drop off that happens from middle school to high school, have we seen any change in that, in, you know, kids deciding they're not going to reapply in high school, or things not, you know, parents not carrying that over? I understood from the last time we talked about it that there's really nothing that we can do. They have to reapply every year. But
They do. Yeah, they have to be recertified every single year. We're working, because there is an auto-cert process in which we have a population, but they're still, even in the auto-cert, they're required to get a mailing address and other confirmation about where they are and what their incomes are. So we see a drop-off because there's a drop-off of engagement for parents and families when kids get older. So we see a much more engaged and higher participation in returning our mail. Right now, we have moved to multiple streams, multiple avenues to try to get the forms out and the eligibility information out to people from both principals as well as classroom teachers as well as our food service. So I think we're doing, we just had a state review of our food service program, and in that process, we spent about 3 hours doing an exit interview, and they speak about our process and our yield is some of the highest in the entire state, but could always improve. Or we could move to universal feeding and stop the whole process. I wanted to just share with you a slide that put together, again, Ben has talked about in this slide about 46 different languages. As we pull them together, this ends up being a little bit under that, but it gives you a good representation of what those languages are that are spoken in our school. And then the top 5 foreign languages by concentration of students is right here. And you can see that the Nepali is probably something that 10 years ago didn't exist within our school at all, and now is our top language, non-English language that's coming into the school. All of this then has requirements as we look at things like notification on Alert Now when we close school, or when we have information that goes home to parents, all this information. And some of these languages are not written languages, so some of them require translation services of the spoken word, and we employ a number of translators to help with the primary languages.
Brian, with the demographics changing, does the data from the free and reduced capture nationalities, or is that not something that is captured as far as the segment that's on?
I'm not sure. I can review the forms are on our website. I could review if there is that kind of demographic or census information captured. A lot of it is residency, income, dependence.
Right, I suspect that's the driver, but I'm also curious whether it's different nationalities, or because with I think Winooski is like a destination city for refugees.
As is Essex Junction as well.
Essex is
Yeah.
as well.
Essex
Okay.
Junction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Essex Junction is a designated refugee resettlement community.
Okay.
Winooski, Burlington, where?
Barry,
Barry, Rutland.
Rutland.
So that is partly why we have we were designated a resettlement location for the Nepali population that was coming into the U.S. One of them.
One of the
I would advise us not to pull out that data.
okay.
To tease down who is in the,
Free.
yeah.
Because identifiers.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I also, at our last meeting, there was some interest in getting the by building K-8 class size averages. So I put what we have. This is data that we end up holding an allegiance to the date that it was generated, which is the October 1 numbers, because this is the data that the state would report on its website, because that is the data collection for the state, the October 1 numbers, to create the ADM. And then I also put in here that the averages work across grade span. It's essential to evaluate. There's bubbles and dips in student numbers and addressing the numbers with different strategies. But that it also, you're still, when you're up here, you're still looking at a building, and you've got to keep drilling down, looking at team configurations, looking at how they loop, how they divide up some of their concentrations. Some work so that teachers are sort of generalists. Some work on teachers that have a little bit more of a concentration and a specialty to them. So, and obviously there's a big difference between grade levels and developmental work that happens between the K-5 and then the 6 through 8 is a very different kind of environment. We've identified some of the areas where we do have bubbles, and those are the places where we're going to be looking to try to look at alternative or voluntary reassignment by families and students, or reassignment of teachers and that kind of stuff. So that's part of we now have some tools that we haven't had before, because now we have multiple middle schools and we have multiple grade clusters are happening across the area. So it went into the public information. It's really just a further definition. We had seen this back in December, again in January. It was in the first packet, and then dropped out. But we had a community member interested in saying, "Are we looking at it?" So,
Keely.
The grades, are these projections for next year, or are these the actual numbers from this year?
these are projections for next year,
Okay.
rolling forward what we have right now. So we're not in all the roll forward. We didn't have any kind of material statistics to tell us that we would have a big difference between out migration and in migration. So they're really roll forward numbers.
Thank you.
So, Martha.
It fascinates me, our last conversation, our last meeting, we were discussing at the younger ages, less in a classroom is better, is felt that it's better for the students, and Westford has higher numbers in the lower grades than the upper grades.
It's just about demographics. And that's how many kids we have in the whole school in first grade or in eighth grade.
There's one
There's
teacher
only
per grade.
one teacher per class. That's not how we teach, but that's how you can think. So we have 2, 1, and 2 teachers, 2, 3, 4 teachers, 2, 5, 6 teachers, and a group of people who teach 7, 8.
So they're having
So the numbers
more
can
births,
even
more
out.
move-ins in the younger grades than where they were in the older grades. So they're seeing a population that has been in a student decline for a while that may be leveling out at this point in time. If these couple of years are a trend. I just also want to go back, make sure that there isn't a misunderstanding. There isn't, and I think it's the feeling of what I've heard from a lot of the educators, there is not any solid data and research that shows that class size has a direct impact on the outcome of what happens in the classroom. The correlation, the greatest correlation, is the quality of first instruction. So class sizes for a while always felt like smaller must be better. It's sort of the opposite of the American idea of more is good kind of thing. So, but the research does not pan out that way.
I thought maybe it's been updated, but there was some research. I thought it was the Tennessee study, I'm not sure that's right, that it did make a difference in the very early grades,
And I think
like K1, 2.
we reflect that,
But-
yeah, in the developmental stages of our class size, we reflect
Right,
that there are
exactly.
some maximum and minimums, but I think for a while there was some thought of, that the idea of a class of 20 was breaking some moment in time or breaking some critical mass that quality instruction couldn't happen. But we do see that you need different size classes for the developmental stages that students are in.
Andre.
You spoke about student placement where there's capacity or too much, but would you also be considering the same for extracurricular offerings where one school might be experiencing a decline based on numbers, whereas another school has an abundance?
Yeah.
In that way, can continue the equity and equality, or to ensure program offerings.
Yeah, Westford is actually being pretty aggressive this year with doing that to continue to offer some sports that otherwise it wouldn't have
Right.
the critical mass to offer. We could look, more globally than that,
So don't-
especially where, if we have access to something that we view as valuable and has an outcome
Sure.
and so forth, then that access, and we can make that, it may not mean that everybody has to have their own, but
Right.
maybe there's access to that opportunity.
Thank you.
Kim?
I know that we do this by averages and we're well within our tolerances based on our policy. And we also used to look just from a sense of how is it looking, even if we were to pull it out, are we really doing our best to be within our max and mins? And it all but in one situation where it's a fractional, and I'm suspecting at EMS it's because the 6th grade teams are the teams that they are, and I completely understand that. There was one year in the not too distant past that I recall that was the case when we were ETSD, and the teachers indicated their interest in retaining their teaming, and the resources of the coaching resources leaned a little more heavily to support the team that was greater. So I like, as I look at this, to be able to see in general the average is lower than I've experienced them in pretty much all the years in ETSD, and understand that there are those bubble years. But even then, we are largely within not even just averages, but within each grade year, keeping to the intent of the policy, I think. And I think just knowing how to support educators in larger clusters when that happens has been successful, I think, in the past. And I think even the community member who was expressing concern acknowledged that in her expression of concern.
Well, I think when Beth works and regularly meets with the principals, they're right down into the minutia of individual students' needs, wraparound supports, team configurations, all the strategies that go into it. Part of our process is to continue to find some altitude from those real particular isolated conversations up to some of these averages. And we use these a lot of times to have discussions, not to be blind to them, because bubbles sometimes where it's a matter of like get through a bubble and you don't see that bubble happening again. Continuity within a school is also really helpful. Bringing somebody in for 178 days can have its own disruption. You add a class or you add a grouping that could then demand additional PE, art, music, so that you have all those special sections, and now you've got this ripple. Really, you're trying to manage a decimal more than an entire kind of systemic issue.
Right. Okay. All right.
I added this slide, and we had talked about this before, I think going back into January or so. EWSD's student to staff ratio is 5.4. So and that is all the staff employed by the district except preschool teachers, food service workers, maintenance and custodial employees, and any staff dedicated to transporting students. So that's our ratio. As we know, Governor Scott would like to see the statewide ratio be 5-1. It's currently about 4-1, if you look statewide.
Can you remind me, Brian, do we get to count preschoolers as fractional?
Or is it the number of kids in the seats? Like our student number is what? It's not, is it equalized?
These
people?
would include, preschool students and preschool teachers are excluded from all this.
Entirely.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then even when we talk about preschool, we normally just talk about the preschool that we offer
Yep.
inside our school buildings. And then beyond that is Act 166, and that population has exploded. Next year, we're anticipating that population is to be over 330 students. So that's really significant. But this is, I thought that was a cute graphic.
It's awesome.
So these are moments like when this first goes up on the screen, those are really the moments where somebody can say, oh, I really like the graphic.
Wow, Brian, I
Yeah, just-
really like this graphic you chose for this slide.
Thank you. Otherwise we wouldn't know when to put it
Can
in.
you do 5 little people? And a
I took off 60% of somebody and it was just weird. I just didn't like it.
Do preschoolers count as 0.4? We could put like a
a little baby in a bucket seat.
Do count as 0.4, not 6, for the purpose of
That's close.
I also put this in because I think it's interesting. So when you look at by school, this is naturally eliminating. In the larger ratio, you're including all the central office staff, administrators, your IT staff, and then also some specialists that perform special ed, or speech and language, occupational therapists, people that are not assigned to a building. But when you look at it so that you look at students that are attending and staff that are primarily assigned to a building, you can see that some of those ratios are actually much higher than the 5.4. Because again, there's some people that don't like the 4-to-1 ratio. They're not sure that 5-to-1 is any much better. And so it's important, I thought, to show something like the high school at 6.4, the EMS, ADL, and so forth going through. I also want to make sure that people understand that individual school ratios can fluctuate year to year and according to student need, so that they still haven't figured this in, because we're not excluding students that require one-on-one aids and other things that are sort of beyond the power of the school district to determine.
But we do need to continually make sure that people understand this is not student to classroom teacher ratio. Yeah, that's what we saw on the other pages.
Yes. So we're going to jump into the budget draft. We have one change from the last time that I presented last Tuesday, and that is up in regular education. And that change was approximately $54,000. And it represents, when I did the tech ed tuition, I was diligent to make sure to capture all the students from the district that were attending the Center for Technology. But we also have a 6-semester average for Burlington, and we have a 6-semester average for what I think is now called Maple Run Technical Center. Some of these, again, as a 6-semester average goes, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily people attending those schools currently, but we have a track record over 6 semesters of people attending them. So, but it was just a matter of going through the data and not seeing how I need to pull all the FTEs together. So that brought us from a 1.7 to a 1.8. On revenue, there are no changes, so that remains at 5.2% for offsetting revenue, that growth, and 16,340,423, and that's the offsetting revenue. The rest of it is then state support. There's no change in the capital plan that we presented the last time, and there's some additional detail in your slides that isn't going to be up on the screen that gives you the breakdown for the major expenditures in FY19 that are planned. In total, are now, after capital and with the change in the tech ed tuition, our total projected educational spending for FY19 is the 61 million here, or approximately 0.51% above FY18's, or about $312,000. So it's about a 0.5% increase in ed spending. But if we look at the percent change in projected educational spending per equalized pupil, that's down 1.18%. And again, this is all in after capital with the change that was made since the last one. So the statewide average was forecasted to be 3.9. That now seems like it's coming in around 2.5. Is that the number? 2.5? 2.4? That's without us submitting, so we'll bring it down some more. So that's the quick overview. We'll spend some more time on that as we go through, but I wanted to dive into the administrative and other support area. So if you recall, we've focused on the 3 primary areas of expenses for EWSD: the instructional programs, which are that's so scary. It just started doing it. I know. It was, and then we're done. Yeah. So we've got direct instruction, special ed, and then also the athletic and co-curricular in that area. In the instructional support that we reviewed at the last meeting goes into guidance, health, speech, language, curriculum. This is also where we talked about occupational therapy and physical therapy. In administrative support, we're now into the principals, superintendent, school board, along with maintenance and information technology. The big thing that changes when we get into administrative support is that we're no longer as heavy on personnel costs to our overall budget. In both of those areas, the predominant resource that we deploy is our talented staff. When we get into administrative and other support, we actually start to balance that a little bit more between staff and then operational costs. And you can imagine when we start to look at electrical bills in the tune of $700,000, natural gas bills in the tune of $400,000, you start to have expenses that are much larger than some of our expenses that you see in regular instruction and so forth. So the total increase for the admin and other support is 1.8. So in the other ones above, if you go back to that overview, you can see that the regular instruction, the direct instruction services is going up 1.9. The support services are nearly flat, I believe. I think it's about a 0.5% or so. And then we have other administrative support. And what we'll do is we'll dive down into each one of these areas. So one of the first ones we come to is the district administrative services. So this is the executive admin, special education admin, human resources, finance, legal, and communications. I group these all together because some of them are relatively really small, and we always think of, well, what's our central office costs? And this is a good approximation of what our central office services are. Of course, we have our instructional development and curricular work, but the way the state treats that, they treat that as an instructional support area. So what we'll go through, I'm sorry, I keep on trying to hit the middle button and I hit the wrong one. So what we'll go through is some of the highlights, places where we've had the most significant change, and those are listed along the side. In salaries, we have all our negotiated contracts that are bumping up salaries along the line. We also have, within the salaries and wage line for this category, we have the elimination of the Director of Legal Support position, and we have the addition of a support staff position for EWSD operations. So that's where we're getting the 4.9% for salaries and wages for all these departments. Employee benefits, I'm not highlighting every one of them. I think we know that as we looked at it before, we looked at health insurance as one big broad category. As of January 1st, we had a really significant change in plan structure, and that plan structure came at a huge savings for premium cost. So we're seeing that, and it's carrying through most of the budgets. So you'll see that in other ones, and we'll just go through it. Yep.
Brian, with the elimination of the Director of Legal Support, do you anticipate that we will have additional outside legal expenses?
We're not budgeting for additional expenses right now. We are understanding that that job is going to be redistributed into a lot into Beth and into my position, some into some other work that we have that's also at the district-wide level. So that's where we see is really much more of an indirect impact across a number of different job categories.
And there are already in 18, there is money for legal outside the district for those occasional phone calls and things. So
and
we
it was
did
bumped
keep
up
that.
in 18, so because it was anticipating additional costs so we kept that capacity.
Yeah.
Negotiations.
Right.
Because we actually will begin that process again.
All over
in the
again.
fall. So,
Right.
so,
We don't mention that around Deb at all.
No.
No.
Too soon.
All right. Thank you.
We'll give her until Wednesday. And then professional consulting, the primary reduction here is the elimination of the extra audits, so we won't have those. And then inside the maintenance of software, we have some increased systems that we want to bring online into finance primarily. It's about getting into electronic timekeeping, integrated timekeeping with our substitute system, as well as our time off approval system. We can get into a time clock system and have it all be integrated. It will save a lot of the sort of routine administrative minutia that happens there. Advertising, we're going to group it all together. There's been, Deb put this in and said that we've had times where this will be the capacity of advertising, mostly for job postings. But when we place an ad, a lot of times we'll charge it to the building in which the ad is being placed for. So this is the budget-wide capacity, and then we'll execute into the various buildings or departments that they belong into. But we, instead of trying to anticipate how much every various function or building should have, we just aggregate it into one place. It's very similar to how we do substitutes, tuition reimbursement, other lines that we know are going to be executed throughout the entire district as we budget into a single line.
Is there a reason why it would need to be built back or budgeted back or?
Expensed from particular buildings. I understand
Yeah.
the sub situation. Like, that makes sense to me. I'm just not sure that advertising for a job. Anyway,
Yeah,
don't know.
I mean,
Doesn't seem
it's
worth
one
the
of those
step.
things, it's not hard for us to do just because of the whole School Springs where we set it up. There is a person that is identified, that person has a home, so we can charge it there. And the state does love it to have us be as precise as possible on a building-based cost. You know, that's as precise as possible is the key element there. And then communications, our communications line is not just something, you know, you got telephones and so forth, but communications, the way the state thinks of that is anything that's using the internet. So any cloud-based program, any software that's delivered through it, any software subscription that you have. And what we have here is $11,000 coming on board, which will be a new cloud-based system anticipated for FY19. And that's some work that Deb is putting in to have another system that would, it's just cloud-based. It would help with some of our volunteer registration process and also background checks. It's a subscription service, and it ended up being over $10,000. In the principal services, the only major line, because most of what we did with the principals is level budget them, so that whatever they had in FY18, we moved to 19. One of the reasons we did that is out of all the conversations we needed to have with principals in this short period of 6 months or 7 months since we came on board, we've wanted to focus on the personnel side, the system side, the delivery side, plus also give enough space for vision, our relationships, and those different works. So we kind of, what this does is by going level budget for the principals, you're able to take your 10 top educational leaders and not tie them up into trying to figure out where they're going to put $3,600 or where they're going to put $3,000 and so forth. Again, you can see these numbers when you take the personnel out and you go from here down to here. It's nearly no resources whatsoever. It's 100% of what they have, but as far as the impact to our budget, it's pretty minimal.
Brian?
Yep.
On the previous slide, you had a line 800 healthcare penalties. Is that our payback to the state?
That's Catamount Healthcare.
Okay.
So there's a fee that we have to pay back into Catamount Healthcare. We charge it out of HR. It's just a regulatory requirement.
Why do we label it a penalty?
I mean, I can change it if it's healthcare fee.
Unless it's, the only compound thing I could think of that was kind of a penalty was if you didn't offer healthcare, but we offer healthcare to everyone. I know there is I think there's a fee based on how many people you employ or something like that.
And you can see that the number at, is at $14,000. That number's, struggles to be material even within this line, much less the $77 million line. But I can look and clarify with Deb a better term for that, whether it's an enrollment fee or a dues or something like that.
Just an assessment.
This is detail that, again, this is moving the detail down to give more exposure and explanation to the board in reviewing the budget and showing some transparency to the public. But again, what we would be looking at is a higher order kind of basis. In this one, the increases are according to the contracts. And then also FY18 did not fully reflect all the personnel which are assigned to principal services. We, across EWSD, there are different structures for our Office of Principal. There's nearly 10 different structures out of the 10 different buildings that we have. So I think that was probably a little bit of a vexing issue coming to the 18 budget with regards to where do registers fit, where do admin assistants fit, where do principals, assistant principals, people that are on the admin team but not in the principal's office, other things like that. So I think we've been able to clean that up, but as we've cleaned it up, we've moved personnel between different function codes to have them now live here for FY18, been 19. In the admin and other support area, one of the biggest increases that we have is the administrative technology services. So the large increase in personnel is that we have the normal increase, but we added a second help desk position during FY18 to meet demand, and then this position is budgeted to continue into FY19. So it's not a new hire in 19, it's a current position, but we did that primarily because we added another 25% of our user base and equipment base and system-wide, but we didn't have the backup on our 1, 2, 3, 4 mechanism, which is our help desk call. And we also were trying to meet it where what was happening was our network admins were folding into the help desk to support the help desk, which was sort of moving people that were at a much higher capability to problem solve, moving them into some of the smaller stuff. And so we were actually continuing to find backup, us backing up. And then the apparent spike in the operating costs here is, some of it is increases, but also some of it is technology budgets that were not fully reflected in FY18. I think some of this may have come from really large investments that were made in big systems, like the $400,000 in telephone systems that was part of last year. And then also some work on copiers and Chromebooks, and there was a couple of very large projects in addition to the annual budget. And I think what we've done is, going into FY19, is we've tried to build in the necessary annual resources for repair, replacement, and upgrade. There is no great movement. There's no stride to change things fundamentally within the technology area. There's really trying to maintain the current systems, kind of a level program basis for all the schools, the 14 buildings, and then the multiple subjects and so forth. So the large part here is in the technology related supplies, and a lot of that, as I said, is really just to get the annual capacity we need. We didn't have, how the budget was put together last year is that we under-resourced primarily the 3 Essex Town schools coming into the budget because of the division of learning design and IT and the series of trying to figure out what was in more than one place, and some things were deleted that weren't in other places.
I'm not sure if it's this or if it would be an instruction, but in terms of embedding technology and using technology in the classroom and supports to that end, is that somewhat consistent across the buildings? Is that resourced similarly? Are they, the equipment itself is only as useful as its ability to transform education? So I was just...
Right, I think this year has been really focused on, I don't even want to use the word equity, but looking at the use of technology across the full system, and then what is needed so that it is equitable across each of the schools. And also looking at the ed tech, the coaches in technology, and seeing their different roles and kind of bringing them together more often and talking about their roles in each of the schools. It is something that I've been talking about. I really want to get a handle on what their role is in the school and how much are they helping teachers to embed technology. I do know often they get pulled away for something else or to fix something, or so we really have to look at those roles. And as Brian and I have been talking about too, you know, when our new teachers that are coming in know so much more about technology. So where does that all fit? And do these coaches become more instructional coaches instead of technology? You know, so that's something, but we need more time to really look at that.
Yeah.
In operations and maintenance of plant, we have an elimination of a mechanical supervisor position. That's really impacting what's happening with the salaries rather than what we've seen in some kind of normal increase with the negotiated contracts. We see a decrease here. And then in general maintenance, we have our regular service contracts for elevators and fire alarms and so forth. I think some of this is some general increases, but also a better knowledge of, as we're going through this year's budget, exactly what do we have and what are those contracts and who has them and how much are they cost. In the maintenance of buildings, there's a number of areas within here that are scheduled HVAC upgrades. Some of them may be just ventilation upgrades. We have some issues in we have a perennial problem right now when it's cold outside. We don't have a captive air system within the founder's kitchen. So it actually exhausts all the hot air out and then it pulls the cold air in. So we can add some equipment to take care of that. There's a large cost to get a propane floor stripper machine for one of the elementary schools. And, some of this is just a matter of kind of, again, really starting maybe in June to be generous, but maybe not more until July or even into August did we start to really cross over and start to work together and have a better understanding of what those relationships were and who was going to be in charge of what and so forth. So we're learning, and some of this is evidence of our learning. The increase of supply in utilities directly related to utilities, our electricity, natural gas, propane, and wood chips. Some of those are going down. We do build in, we know that we could have cost savings in natural gas, but I'm not sure if people outside of the high school know that we're such a large customer that we're an interruptible natural gas customer. So that if there are demands within the system, we can be knocked off of natural gas and therefore have to go into burning fuel oil. And that's so that they can balance the overall residential side. This physical plant being almost 500,000 square feet, it is that size of like one of the large institution clients. So generally speaking, there's 142 employees that fall into this area. Again, to put that into size, we're at that 956 employees. So, roughly 1 in 10 around there. Is that right? 142 to 950. 1 in 9. 60% of a little person. So
Let's bring back the bubble.
no bubbles.
The bubbles look good in this picture.
Yeah, the bubbles came back. I forgot
Yeah,
to-
working it.
They're
Working it.
appropriately sized.
Average employees in the administrative other support has worked for the EWSD or one of the legacy districts for 12 years. This is the story throughout the entire district, is that we have a very veteran workforce. We have a lot of experience, a lot of expertise. It also means that over the course of the next 10 years, the district is going to have a huge amount of attrition, a huge amount of turnover, and it will need to be strong and resilient to handle all that change. $1.4 million is budgeted for utilities, so that is not a small amount of money as we're looking at some of the other line items. That in itself becomes a major component. But again, think of the nearly 1 million square feet of space that we have for instructional and office space. So total projected cost for FY19 is just over $19 million going to administrative and other support. Within administrative and other support is the transportation costs. So it's the intention of the district to provide to and from transportation to all schools for all grades. That's not necessarily all students, right? Because the board and the red district had already talked about working on a radius basis around schools. So, but we have talked about making sure that there were all schools, all grades. In addition, the district's required to provide all special ed transportation. And then finally, the district must meet all the demands for extracurricular and co-curricular. And that is an enormous amount of trips. It's over 800 individual trips that are scheduled for athletics and co-curriculars. So the strategic direction is, we talked about before, and this comes from that, is we think that greater operational control can really unlock some of the problems that we've had with sustainability and also improvement within our transportation. That looking at non-traditional approaches to transportation could create some value to our students and our staff, schools and broader community. And then innovative partnerships where maybe we're not doing it all, but we're maintaining our core competencies. Maybe we can get something that other districts haven't been successful in getting. The budget highlights funding for transportation is flat. So all the lines for transportation, 3 different categories, end up being flat, which is part of the promise that we said that we're looking to keep transportation costs flat for the next 3 years. So the 19 budget includes funding for a transportation manager to oversee routing, logistics, and compliance. That had been contemplated for the 18 budget and was chosen not to go with it, but we are looking to introduce it coming up. And then cost for transportation planning management software is included. Again, there was a decision to forego and stop that subscription service or that software service, but we really need that in-house intelligence to do the routing and to try to make sure that we're as efficient as possible.
There's a typo on that slide you want to hear.
Sorry.
You can pass it along to me. But in transportation, there's a lot of work underway. So we're looking to align our to and from school transportation across the entire district. We also look to strengthen pedestrian travel to and from schools, because I think that ends up becoming sort of the perfect equation by establishing transportation zones that would be outside these radiuses. The board has talked about and has established a half mile for grades K through 8 and 1 mile for 9 through 12 as a radius, at least in Essex Junction. But I think it warrants taking a look at what those radiuses might provide as opportunities in other locations as well. And then EWSD can increase the number that we can look for solid pedestrian safety protocols across all communities so that we can increase the number of kids who have safe pedestrian access to schools. All of this, of course, will improve efficiency and reduce costs. Routes and stops, moving towards a system that's based more on designated bus stops and route designs that go beyond the point-to-point focus. We can create more efficiencies and open up possibilities of more value. So this is, we're very much oriented, our history is very much oriented on a door-to-door basis. And that comes at a cost, and it also doesn't do a lot of promotion of pedestrian or other transport when something's door-to-door. School start and stop times, we've been talking about this since, I guess, November, all of these since November when we talked about viable solutions, but as school times are reimagined to match new master agreement with teachers and to better address developmental needs and realities of our students, it's time to also improve transportation scheduling and timing. Not to design our school start and stop times around our buses so that they're counter to other things that we try to do, like educate kids, but to make sure that that we're sensitive to them and we try to optimize it for transportation as a result. And then designated ridership. We currently are transporting less than 45% of our student population. However, current practice is to design routes to accommodate 100%. So we know that we see it over and over again, that we have buses that are underutilized, and we run routes with no students, fast passengers.
Brendan?
Ryan, you talked about a phased approach to our transportation plan. And I know tonight's a budget presentation, but can you give us like a quick understanding of what the impacts will be for the 3 communities in the coming year for phase 1?
Well, I think that there's the school and school start and stop times will impact the broad community, and we can also look at doing that in a phased way potentially, but that has the potential of having the most impact across the entire EWSD. And then we can make our current operations as they are designed and contracted potentially more efficient by looking at things like designated ridership and introducing some margin of routes and stops so that we can kind of improve our efficiency.
Right.
What we want to do then is to improve the efficiency of what we're currently doing, transfer those resources into trying to self-perform more, if not all, of our special ed transportation. And we feel that there's, it's a way that with the reimbursement, with the intensity, also with some of our experience already, that it's a good place for us to get our practice and to build the infrastructure that we need to support and admin support and so forth, to recruit, because we have those employees right now. Those are ours for special ed, for at least the Essex Junction side of things. So then what we would look at is probably contracting with an outside vendor in our new paradigm of how we want to provide transportation for EJ,
Yeah.
so that we could have contracts then come to a common end and then begin to self-perform from there. So all of this really can take our current operation and I think yield a great deal of efficiency and more effectiveness, maybe more value to the community.
Right.
So, Brian, just a second. I also don't want to get into this tonight, but I think it would be helpful if we could see a communication plan for all of this mapped out soon. I just know that these are issues that almost more than anything else create angst and anxiety in parents, and so I want to stick to the budget tonight, but I think in the near future we need to understand what the communication rollout looks like. Okay, Keely.
Yeah, Martha's point is good because just everyone who works for the district, everyone who sends kids to the district will have different daycare needs if school start and stop times change, for instance, and different times that they can work. My question was just to clarify what you meant by a contract on the new paradigm. Does that mean a contract for like leasing buses, but we're providing the drivers, or a contract that includes drivers, which didn't really work last year?
Yeah, the first part would be to take a look at some of this stuff as creating a new paradigm, so that, one of the reasons why we needed 11 routes in Essex Junction in order to do that is because we were taking a process and trying to do exactly what we had done in other districts to make it happen here. There was no staggering of start and stop times in any of the schools, so there was there couldn't be any kind of reusing of buses. We also, there was no designated ridership, so we were designing routes that would cover 100% of population when we know that, we're not going to have some of that. So there would be some ways that we could go from, say, a set of 11 buses, potentially some of the early stuff that we've been looking at is down into the range of like 5 or 6 buses, and then working in loop systems rather than to and from, so that you would have almost like an internal Green Mountain Transit loop that would be happening within it, so that students would have access to transportation more than just once a day to and from school. in the morning and in the afternoon.
But I think
So those are-
he also asked a good question. Are you still considering leasing the buses and having us employ the drivers?
So that place is where we're looking to wade into the water there is in the special ed area.
So
Right
if
now.
there's still only one driver available, we won't be busing EJ next year?
That is a universal truth, right? I mean, for us, if there's one driver available, then we won't be busing EJ is a universal truth. I don't think it's a reality. I think we'll have more than one driver. I think we'll also be looking at less than needing 11. And also, we've been able to now, I think, create a whole different relationship with our vendor over the last 7 months of working with them that I don't see it as the same way that we started when I came in July. So I think that
And the current contract, is it flexible enough that if by redesigning the routes in Essex Town, you end up with 3 spare drivers from Essex Town, you could use
Potentially.
them in a
potentially
different community?
you know, again, we were looking to try to say Essex Town has an entire system to transport high school students into Essex Junction that begin and end at every boundary of Essex Town, but includes nothing of Essex Junction. And then we wanted to create a system within Essex Junction that would collect all the high school students and put them in. I mean, with a little bit of perspective, we see like, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. The other part is we have to find efficiencies because as one of the findings that we did in the research in November is we do not have a marketable wage that we're offering. We are not going to find employees to operate the bus at this wage. We know that CVU is self-performing theirs, and they're offering wages that are $8 to $10 more per hour. So we know we have to go there, which means we have to renegotiate contracts to get higher wage, higher expectations, better drivers, more to do that. So that's going to have to be universal, because I'm not going to be able to create a wage that, depending upon what road you're driving on, you're going to get $22 an hour and you're going to continue to get $16 an hour. So we need to find those efficiencies in the system itself to be able to have higher wages. And I think higher wages were one of the key. There were people that were being hired as bus drivers while we tried unsuccessfully to hire 11 of them, as well as other CDL drivers for Casella and other places like that.
Okay, yes, one more question on transportation, but then I think we need to get to seat.
It's a little bit of the chicken and the egg, I think. That utilization of ridership number might be higher if the routes were more efficient and it didn't take as long. So I think that asking people whether they want to subscribe or opt in or opt out before they know what the start times are, I really think you'll want to come out with very clear information, as specific as possible, with as great an estimation as you could of when they'd be picked up for a start time of school at what time, before you can invite people to tell you whether they're in or out.
Yep. And we start next Tuesday.
Yeah.
With the board taking a look and holding the beginnings of what school start and stop times might look like. And the board has that vested interest in knowing that the current start and stop times across the district can not continue because of the negotiated contract that you were able to settle with the teachers. We have school days that are less than 6.5 hours, and we don't then have so we're not getting the student contact time that's part of the contract, and we're certainly hard pressed to get the whole contract length durations. So we know we've got changes, and those will start on Tuesday, and I think that's the one that has the greatest lightning in the jar with start and stop times, and the board will be playing a primary role at pushing information out, and we'll be going to students, and staff will be engaging with it at their early release in March 12th. Would like to see it come into part of the vision, because and even coming into and being exposed on Fine Arts Night and our annual meeting and so forth. So that's going to be a big part. I think designated ridership we'll be able to put out there and explain, and we'll see what we yield. And the routes and stops we'll be able to show people maps, but the start and stop times is going to be really personal to people,
Right.
to your staff and to your parents.
Yeah. I just
Okay.
am still a little gun shy from having not had enough buses a few years ago. You might recall in Essex when we were able to cut back at exactly the same time we were changing bus companies, and it was really difficult at that point to find where we were going to get another body to drive another bus because we were too short, and that was with projections provided from the previous provider. So
Yeah.
good luck.
This is, yeah, this is just a topic that's going to make us all nervous until it works. Yeah. Okay, let's move on.
In the child nutrition services also falls within the administrative and other supports. And so we operate as an enterprise standalone entity, receiving limited direct support from the district. So there has been subsidies that have been provided through the general fund. There's a good deal of, obviously, as a standalone, there's tremendous indirect support that's provided. You know, it's certainly, no one, as I argued to the state of Vermont the other day, is that even when we look at something being cost neutral, it's because we're not charging any costs for facilities or equipment or heating or secure, all the other costs that we would charge. So, but it provides breakfast and lunch at every one of the EWSD schools. The services that we provide, healthy meals, breakfast and lunch, the dietary needs, this is another one I could probably fill up a slide like that foreign language slide of 40 to 50 different allergies and dietary needs that we manage on a daily basis out of that nearly 500,000 meals that we serve. Farm to school initiatives, field trip meals, in-district catering and ordering. We serve as the primary food service for Little Ones University. It's something we do. It's cost neutral. It provides a good service to that group. And then we also provide summer meals programs in the community. So we do free meals for anyone under the age of 18 out of Maple Street Park. And we also provide meals in a reduced cost at Founders. And we can look to continue to expand those and do all the time work with them to find clusters where we can provide those free meals. The FY19 budget highlights for child nutrition services. We're reorganizing the department, eliminating 2 administrative positions and reinvesting some of the savings to meet administrative clerical needs. That will allow us to eliminate the planned subsidy from the general fund for FY19. I make no promises that we're going to take this up again when we get to FY20, because it's, you know, we need to make decisions that that take into effect the overall cost to our taxpayers, but also how we balance that with educational priorities. Breakfast after the bell is a classic one, is that participation will be 2 to 3 times, if not more, higher in a breakfast after the bell, but we have limited amount of time when it comes to the day already. So it's hard. It's a lot of trade-offs and choices.
Are we going to actually see the budget for nutrition services?
Well, it won't be in the same timeline as our general fund because it's not voted on, but I'm working on getting a rink budget, a skill tech budget, a VoCorp budget, and a food service budget to the board so that we can also have some time. I'd like the board to dive into each one of those operations, especially the vocational corp. The CTE corp is, it's a huge endeavor that I think sometimes people don't even know it's happening, that we're one of the major land developers in this community.
No, I know. I'm on the board that approves that.
The elimination of that planned subsidy, then that's a change from
Yes.
where we originally started. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, it was originally planned to go from 108 down to about 75,000. But by having, when we did the early notification incentive, one of the employees that the positions being eliminated, Bob Clifford will come out of child nutrition services, actually into fiscal services, or into the district admin services, because his work is going to be on purchasing and on some system development.
Supportive role rather than managerial.
So he's actually in his year of transition in FY19, he's going to be looking to try to change some of our systems around. I don't know if you know, but Bob was instrumental in starting the food service cooperative purchasing program that now is being used by the vast majority of schools across the state and has saved millions of dollars for the state in group purchasing. And we think that there's opportunities to look further in other types of purchasing that we do to try to find that savings. And if not just on a district-centric basis, perhaps on a statewide basis, as well as trying to turn Bob's attention and time to see if he can bring forth the conversation about universal feeding across the state as well.
Thank you.
We ready for CTE?
Let's do it.
So CTE is all about budgeting in the other direction. So, and maybe we should take a page from each other and think of it. But Bob works on a revenue basis and then has his expenses fit into it. So his key revenue is about his 6th semester average. And as you know, this is not about who's attending, it's about who historically has attended the tech center. So right now, the number for his 6th semester average for next year is 347.22. That's a decrease. However, what Bob sees is that he currently has, as of October 1st, 389 students that he's educating. Now, some of that is the breakdown of the whole FTE, what is the full-time equivalent and how much does someone count. And our engineering and automotive intro classes are not counted as full-time. So it doesn't mean that much changes in your life, it just means that somebody counts them differently. So, and the same thing for their engineering program has a huge dynamic back and forth between Essex High School and their engineering program because of the richness of classes at Essex High School that can complement the engineering program at the Tech Center. But it is one of the difficulties of working a budget that needs to recruit and educate 389 students when you're getting funding for 347. And you can also see, and Bob is very aware of this, the big part of 2 semesters drop off, 2 semesters add on, and depending upon what's dropping off, and you can see next year, unfortunately, 2 good-sized years are dropping off, and if we don't, we are anticipating another drop. This will level out to some degree because the Tech Center continues to recruit higher than its potential high school students. The Center for Technology is the highest, most attended regional technical center in the state of Vermont with the 347. There are some schools that are below 100. And then you can also see the representation. These are the current students that are attending. The vast majority of the students that attend the Technical Center are from Essex High School, but we also have some other communities that are represented and some actually from fairly good distances away. These students that are fairly good distances away would normally be required to attend their local or their regional technical center unless they wish to participate in a program that is not offered by that regional. So that's how you get some of this travel.
If that means you want a full day instead of a half-day type program?
It's not on the delivery of the program, it's on the offering of the program. And we are unique in that our region has 2 tech centers.
Yeah.
So no other region has 2 tech centers. And there is a concentration, there is an effort made to have distinctly different programs. So.
I actually have 2 kind of small questions. One is the intro classes. do those students get as much contact with CTE educators, or is it that they're like there half as long as the?
Yeah, they're there for a portion of the day.
Okay, so that would be a reason why they wouldn't be full-time?
Right.
Okay. And my other question would be, is there any role that we as a board or as district administration can have in spreading the word about CTE, or does that all have to fall under Bob Travers' budget for getting people to get the word out? I mean, like, is it something that, like, Voices for Education
Yeah.
could?
Right.
Yeah. I think that in our efforts, we don't look at it as being discrete or separate or less effort in our social media and our postings and our news and our web presence and so forth. So, we try to get the word out that way. I think it is a lot of trying to get people to understand what the technical center is today, opposed to their understanding of their technical center they may have been associated with when they were younger.
It's just if they keep having to cut budgets, that reduces a resource that is great for, clearly we have the biggest enrollment there, so.
Has there been any programs that have been not offered due to lack of interest or declining enrollments that other tech centers have actually picked up, and that maybe that's shifted students to those centers? Or have we been pretty stable with our offerings?
So to offer a program has a number of requirements, and that one of the key requirements is the Department of Labor has to see enough potential future jobs in that program area in order to offer it. So when a program is looked at to be discontinued, it would need to go through the various hoops and hurdles to determine, are those jobs still there? Are they not? It can be a matter that more often than not, when something's eliminated, is because it's run its course, or there's something
As for the
that's.
Department of Labor, so the decision point is not so much tied to enrollment, but more of a Department of Labor need.
Well, I think that Bob has to watch those numbers, so it is tied to enrollment
is.
as he's looking at program.
Right.
And looking at an average semester program too.
This is a particular area that I had a slightly different approach on. If you have a popular program like web design, in which you have 3 times the amount of enrollment as per seats, then how can you turn those students away that want to know more about that subject? It's because it's limited to what the employers can hire. And I don't think that's exactly the way that we should be looking at this in total. And it's just a difference of opinion, but I think it should be available to more students from outside.
So you can have a conversation with Dylan. Is pre-tech a full day program or a part day?
I'm pretty sure it's half day.
Okay, so that helps me understand the difference between the 389 and the whatever it was, because that's 25 and the other intro courses are 12, so that's like almost 40 students, 40 FTEs, right?
I think one of the things.
Diane?
No, I was going to say, one of the things is getting the word out that, that the tech center continues to impress people that open themselves up to learning more about it. But it still requires that aspect of somebody sort of opening themselves up to it. And you can see that, they have 26% of their students are completing at least one college course. That's higher than our high school participation. It's higher than it's higher than what the state's seeing. I think the state is around 13% for dual enrollment. Industry recognized credentials at 81.5. That's people coming through the program that's walking away with something that is very tangibly valuable within an industry that they already have expressed a passion about. Co-work, 70% of the students are placed in at least one work site of interest across their time here. And then also in the National Technical Society, there's a part of it that, it's that there is a great deal of rigor, especially in some of the programs. The rigor and the reading level is quite a bit higher than what you would see in a lot of the standard classes in the high school. Grade level reading, Bob Travers has told me, for auto mechanics is up at like a 14th grade or so level. So there's quite a bit of rigor there. The center itself has an exceptional track record of being awarded in the state competitions. It always has a great showing. It also has participated really well in the national competitions in the Skills USA, and recently, I think it was last year, that there were 2 students that went to Germany and participated in the international competition. So, it is what I continue to find when I've done different outreach with people is people say, I had no idea. And so we need to try to change that around.
And I will say that Kelly mentioned voices, and if there's a role for that group, this was one of the areas that's rising to the surface when we present to the board after the next meeting. This is one of the areas that that had a lot of energy to take this jewel that we have and let the community know that it exists, and try to change that kind of attitude around what tech is and how the community perceives the tech as CTE in general. So more on that.
And of course, their senior day that they offer is probably one of the great budget passage efforts that our school does, because they bring in 200 plus senior citizens to go through cosmetology and their web design, get them set up in social media, have their car taken care of, and so forth. So it really is a wonderful event that they plan and execute, and the students are front and center on every minute of that day.
So my question is given the quick fact sheet here, and my question does apply to this, is that the legislature is working on a variety of workforce training bills. Yeah, we'll talk about that one later, Dylan, but especially on Thursday. So, how are you planning to potentially dovetail with that legislation if it passes?
Both Brian and I have spoken with Bob at different times, and we speak a lot about CTE. I think we need to do some really out-of-the-box thinking with career tech centers. I think that coming out of legislation will be really interesting to see what happens. But Bob's pretty interesting to talk to about thinking outside of the box and how we can expand upon CTE or what we can offer, and thinking a lot of different ways. We definitely need to use it in a different way.
I think we also have to recognize that the funding system challenges technical centers, because other districts don't want to send their money somewhere else, regardless of sometimes what's better for their students. So that's a challenging piece as well.
From a cost standpoint, it's more expensive for that district than a regular student to send it to CTE.
The big thing is they don't get to count the student,
That's
so
true.
they don't get the revenue. That's, I think, the piece that districts talk about the most.
That's true.
Yeah. Okay.
So under the expense summary, the gross expenses are projected to decrease by 2.8%. So what he's needed to do with the decline in his 6-semester average, that being one of his primary lines, is he's needed to make sure that he's accommodated that reduction in reducing expenses. And And in the revenue side of things, you can see that he's got his offsetting revenues that come in, fund balance and so forth, various programs, and then there's a whole series of different funding mechanisms that come in to technical education that help reduce the tuition cost and help subsidize some of the various positions. But in the end, what he needs to do is generate a certain amount of tuition support, and that is, and that's the 5.8 million. If you look at that 5.8 million by a 6-semester average, you have a tuition of $16,850, which is a 0% increase over FY18, which is what his intention was to do, is that he didn't want to provide any further disincentive of sending towns to send kids. Didn't want it to be another barrier in his recruitment. He knows he needs to recruit in hard times, and these are hard times, so.
So what's the cutting?
It's a whole series of expenses that he's looking at. There are no program reductions. There's a series of, again, he is benefiting from a substantial decrease in health insurance, and he's benefiting from a substantial decrease in shared services, because we've been able to economize on our side as well. So between kind of cutting, trimming, and appropriating, he's been able to get there between those two primary things to help out, but no major program discontinuation, no program introduction either in it.
No major elimination. Guidance sticks out there. That's not eliminating a guidance person. It's just.
We have a person that is on a contract right now that is scheduled to leave already. So with that person wouldn't be replaced. It's an attrition change. But they believe the services are capable. I'm still working with Bob in this. In fact, we were just, Deb, Bob, and I were working on some more numbers with his personnel, because he's trying to find additional operating dollars to help him with a backloader and a potential bus purchase. So he's still working it. I would imagine I'm going to come in on next Tuesday with some yellow dots on here as far as things that may have changed. But the key takeaway here is level tuition, and then this is the projected total expense for Essex Westford School District for tech tuition. And though I had to increase it, you know, if we go back and think of that first set of slides, I had to increase tech tuition, it's still a significant decrease because our 6-semester averages are going down. So we have same tuition, and we have a decrease in 6-semester average for Essex Westford School District, 2 technical centers.
Okay. I think there was something about the way you said that was confusing. But I think the overall message is that the cost to Essex Junction is less. I mean, the cost to EWSD is less because our number of students on a 6-semester average basis is declining. Okay.
But it's also more difficult when going the other way, when you're adding students.
Right.
You're getting less, not as much revenue.
Right, but the point was to level things out so that sending districts wouldn't see big spikes in their budget, so that it's something that's more predictable. And I actually think that has been helpful. It doesn't create as much animosity when you know, as other areas can, when you see big spikes.
There's a smoothing factor to the 6 semester.
Right, exactly. That was the point of it. Okay.
So I reoriented this again. To have the most significant impacts be the largest part of the pyramid, expenses, revenue, equalized pupil, yield, common level appraisal. There could be some argument about one or two.
But I think when you do the math, doesn't it go in that order? Yeah.
Sure.
I was not wanting to do
But, so what I have here is that the expenses have changed since the last time we saw it, and that's the one that went up to the, up into direct instruction for the tuition to technical centers increased. And also, what I'm finding is, as I was going through Brad's information, I realized that the information that I was using was from all the budget workshops that the board had last year, had both the yield and the equalized pupil incorrect. Or the yield obviously can change over time,
Well, that changed at the
but
end
the
of
equalized
session.
pupil was different. So equalized pupil is up 3.9%, 3.9 pupils. The yield is up $84, and the budgeted expenses are up $54,000. So all of that then comes down and gives us our, so we have our 1.18% decline in ed spending per equalized pupil. And then we have our incentive tax rate of last year was $1.50 and 1/10 of a cent. And now it's $1.55 and 3/10 of a cent. Or roughly we're at that anywhere between 5.8 and 5.5% increase in tax rate. If we take this and we roll it forward into the number that we feel has a good deal of possibility in changing, if I just take and have all the same math go through, but I just keep the yield at 10,160, you can see that the tax rate then goes down to anywhere between 2% to 2.4%. All the numbers above the line don't change. It's just from the yield down.
Chances are the yield won't go up that much though. So, but, okay. I wonder if we should have the income sensitivity rate prior to being incentivized and then what it is after the incentive.
Yep.
I think that would make sense.
I will, I have an expert that can help me run those numbers.
Did you agree with my calculations?
I did.
You must have been happy when I came out with the same number you did.
Every email that starts off with good news almost is certain to get read. And yeah, I was looking at Brad's information. It's like if this before incentivized, it's like 2.7 and 2.71.
Right. Yeah.
So we can just add that like unincentivized
I
and
think
incentivized.
I think it's helpful for people to understand that when you're paying based on income, you get the advantage of the incentive as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is if you go back and you look at, these are not huge numbers, 3.9 more equalized pupils and $84 difference on the yield. But those two numbers are making up almost 1% on the tax rate. And I figured I was using, February budget data and also annual report data, and figured at least that I was going to be good with equalized pupil. But there can be changes. I mean, it's not things can happen where somebody protests, and as they protest, it works through the system, and you either gain or lose. So, I mean, 3 students out of 3,700 is it's not a substantial.
What was our number before?
It was 3.9 students less, so it was, I think people probably have it if they have the last one, but it was, that's how much it was up.
So,
37.
so that, and that's just the difference between what we used when we were talking to taxpayers last year. We're still up 64, right? We still have
Yeah.
64 more
Yes.
equalized pupils.
It's 1.7%
Right.
increase.
I think correcting the numbers makes sense for purposes of the, obviously using the right information going forward. I'm assuming our tax rates are in fact currently in 2018, in fact, what those are right there. There's no correction to those, right?
Yeah, those are, you know, those are all calculated and come up, and if everything works with the CLA, yeah, those are, yeah.
Okay. So we don't, but I'm just thinking that information off to the side would be confusing if you were not part of this conversation.
Yes.
So for future
Yeah.
iterations or release of this information, it's only meaningful to us.
Okay.
And I think it would confuse the situation.
Yep. So tomorrow's public slide will just go in with no yellows, and it will have this,
Yeah.
but no yellows and no note here. And then I wasn't thinking about, I think this what if can also become confusing if you're not following and you don't know all the numbers and the yield and so forth.
I think we'll have a what if at some point, once the Ways and Means Committee passes a tax bill, they'll change the yield. It probably will get changed again before the process finishes, but we've certainly done that in the past year, use the December letter, show what that would have meant, use the latest information out of the legislature, show what that looks like, and then say, this is gonna change again before everything's finished.
Well, if I remember correctly, it's always certain that it will change approximately 12 hours after sending it to the printer.
Yes.
So.
The other thing that I sometimes find mind-boggling, it'll change in a way that is more favorable after budgets have already passed, not ours being late, but particularly in an election year. We might anticipate things that to me make no sense because they put you in a bigger hole the following year. And those are the things that are kind of maddening because you're like, wait a minute, people already passed their budgets with that year that we had such a high tax increase coming out of the box. People were passing their budgets and then they go and, mess around and we're in a hole the following year. So
right.
It just doesn't make sense, but it's the kind of stuff I've come to anticipate in election years.
So the yield actually went down between the time that we did the budget and when the legislature finished. Must have, right?
It went up $84. At least the numbers that were being used in the budget development slides for January and February.
What was in the annual report for an equalized homestead tax rate was 15833, and there it's 160. So that would, unless something else changed, I'll keep looking at it. We don't need to figure that out right now.
So, what we have coming up on Tuesday, which will be, I guess, our 5th meeting in a row, is that we go through any updates and revisions come back to the Center for Technology, which I know Bob Travers is going to want to work on. You know, at the end of the day, that really is looking that, you know, it's his strategy about the 16,850, and you knowing whether he is changing any programs fundamentally, whether we're moving away from educational offerings or a level program and so forth. Where some of the numbers ends up is a little, I think, a little less relevant, whether he's trying to make sure he's getting a bucket loader versus technology purchases. And then the capital fund, we'll have one last look at that. If there's any questions that come up, otherwise we'll just kind of treat it as we did tonight. But the plan would be to use the February 20th regular board meeting to try to do a full budget walkthrough so that people can see all the, you know, the various information that we have.
And would you be looking for us to approve a budget amount and a capital fund amount at the meeting on the 20th?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're going to be attempting to get a draft of a warning also so that people can take a look at what
we can't sign it. It's too soon to sign it, but if we can at least look at it. I was looking at last year's warning, and it doesn't say anything about electing school directors by Australian ballot, and I was trying to figure out how long the terms are once you are elected. I was pretty sure it was 3 years, but I thought I could go back and look at the warning and find that out. And there was nothing on the warning about electing school directors, so.
Isn't it because we end up, it has to go on the municipal
Well,
ballots now?
I think it's because you formed ahead of the budget.
Pardon?
Didn't we vote
No.
before your existence? We voted for the school officers.
We did. Yeah, but last year we had to elect people who only had 1-year terms. They had to run last year, and they were elected in April. So there is some confusion about municipal versus school district, and we got that change in law, but what exactly does that affect? And so there's some conversation going on behind the scenes, but that's a question that I had late today. Brendan?
Brian, I have just a recommendation for this slide. If you could add back the dates of those previous meetings, you can gray them out, but I think it'd be important for people to see the progression of the dates, because this could be the first time they see this slide.
Yep. Great.
That's a good suggestion. Other comments, thoughts, things you're going to need before next Tuesday? Kim?
Are we able to put up in some form the capital expenditures that happened in this year? So the realization of the capital plan from the previous budget? Yeah.
I have an email here from Chris Leopold on March 4th of 2017 indicating that we originally had the election of the 4 school directors in the warning. It was removed so that they could be placed on the local school district ballots as they were required to be last year, but since those don't exist anymore, we should probably put Article 13 back in our warning.
Can you?
Sure.
That's awesome, Keely.
If we don't have to call Chris again,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
Can we change the budget based on?
Lower by $300.
Volunteer opportunity.
So who needs this? Beth and Brian?
Please.
I'm not exactly sure the process for it, but the request to be able to offer chorus at Fleming, that request that came before us this morning, or was it this morning? I don't know. A little bit ago. Is that something that will get some perspective on, some consideration, like just know what your thoughts are on that or what might happen?
I've worked with Dan and looked at, had him be creative with his budget, and they will have a full-time.
Oh, great.
Okay, thank you.
We went into the budget season knowing we didn't want to add anybody. And that was a clear message to the administration. When Dan approached us about this, we said, okay, so be creative because we're not adding. So
Yeah.
he's been creative, and yeah. I did see a great music lesson the other day. I wanted to tell you. That was awesome.
Thank
so
you.
It's part of the recommended budget that you.
Okay. Yeah.
What's the music teacher's
So, other comments, questions?
Wait, are you gonna communicate that with the people who came here tonight, or is that just gonna be, what's the protocol for the people who came here tonight? Wait, is that a communications? Should I write to Erin, or should you, or how would you like, or should Martha?
I think that we need to allow Dan to have that conversation with his
Okay,
teacher first and go from there.
okay.
Yeah.
And that is the protocol that
Ask Dan to communicate it to PTO.
well, we could, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, I think so.
And maybe copy Martha or something on.
Response to the extent it's an email communication, just something that closes the loop so that we know
So
he told the teacher and
Yeah,
the teacher
And Martha
the-
gets included in that.
so that somewhere we know that it's
Well,
been
we can
closed or it
definitely
goes to Beth
represent-
or something.
And we can have Dan represent that it, is his advocacy, it's in the recommended budget. We all know that if the budget doesn't pass, then
All
we,
bets are
yeah,
off.
we have,
Right.
so this doesn't become the thing that we sanctify, that everything else can change except this, so.
Right.
But yeah, letting people know that it's in the recommended budget that's being worked on, then that's helpful information.
Okay. Anything else?
Is this working for folks?
Yeah.
It's good. So if you have questions between now and next Tuesday, get them to me and try to get them answered before, or either before Tuesday or at Tuesday's meeting. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's see. Can you put the agenda back up there? Okay. I don't think we do messages to the community for these budget work sessions. But our next meeting is on the 20th. But our first meeting in March is scheduled for town meeting day. At least one person, Diane, has to count votes that night. So we'd like to look at whether Wednesday or Thursday of that week would be a possibility for a meeting. What do folks' calendars look like?
Thursday is better for me, the 7th or the 8th.
So let's look at the 8th. Pardon? So is there anybody who cannot do the 8th? Oh, okay. But it's the week,
It's that
so
week.
the day doesn't matter. Okay,
You'll let Patrick know?
yes.
Of the meeting.
All right, so let's schedule it for the 8th. Mm-hmm. Okay,
Doing the usual 6:30 time.
yeah, yeah.
Even though we don't have a communication plan that comes out for this meeting, I assume that since the 20th will be sort of the last review of the budget before we recommend it, that we'll do at least the minimum of some advertising about the meeting itself through social media and
Yep.
such.
Yes.
Ben's doing a great job.
Yeah, he is. I just
Yes.
wanted to be sure that.
Yep.
Maybe that it is possible adoption.
Should-
right?
Oh,
So I
Brian,
think the
Brian,
language should be back
did
here.
you send out
Final
the,
budget
the,
review and
ch- the
possible
foils?
adoption.
Yeah.
Did you send them out?
Liz?
Just on communications, Martha and I spoke briefly before the meeting about making the community aware of the openings for the boards so that we can put it out there, and it's all 3 communities for 3-year terms. Is there any reason to wait on that, or should that go out?
Yeah, I sent an email to Ben today.
Okay.
And, yeah, it should go how.
And the other thing was, it's
March
March
5th.
5th, yeah, March 5th. The other thing was that I saw in the minutes from last meeting that someone suggested a running Q&A document on the website, as well as some Essex Reporter postings. Do you want me to our team to move forward on those? We're ready to roll with those? Okay.
In the vein of meetings, can I get a read on people's possible availability on February 20th to meet 45 minutes before the board meeting as legacy boards to review and accept audited reports?
I cannot give you that reason. I know we can, but I am not a quorum.
Would that
Well, can those of us
Who are here.
are here, that's what you're
Yeah.
asking, right?
Yeah, there's a
I'm
lot of
not a
logistics that we'll need to,
Legacy board member, so
Right.
the
right.
fact that I can't come.
You
to-
don't know.
Yes,
For this purpose.
I can come.
So.
Great, okay. We'll, yeah, so we'll start, anticipate getting queried. I'll work with Lorna to see if we can pull all those pieces together.
Great.
Will we get this material ahead of time?
Yeah,
So you'll be contacting, the chairs, like Mike Smith and.
yep,
Mark.
all the legacy members to get a quorum, yep.
Is that in essence, the last meetings of the
Yes.
former boards?
Yes.
Or-
will we be able to send out the audits for the review ahead?
Yes. In PDF version. They'll be posted with a link to them.
And we get a hard copy?
So, are we?
I can arrange that.
We're doing an executive session.
There's,
Yes.
We're doing an executive session? Yeah, a quick one. All right. So I'll entertain a motion to move into executive session to discuss contract negotiations. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. And we'll go to the conference room.
Do you remember this letter that came?
Yes.
So they can do it if the board wants to be videotaped, because this had talked about around town meeting day, and we had said, well, let's see if they can do it another time. It just seemed